Hello and welcome to the VFM podcast. I'm here with Ian Fairbairn, our senior consultant at VFM, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the business cycle. So Ian, first question is, what is the business cycle?
So there is an idea in economics that businesses go through a cycle which basically means an upturn followed by a downturn. Mm-hmm. And that has been an accepted part of economic theory for a long, long time. So those typical business cycles, you can say a 4 or 5 year business cycle from, peak to peak, trough to trough. So that's the typical sort of business cycle. And it's characterized by increases in investment, increases in demand, followed by saturation of the market. Then, of course, there are other alleged business cycles. So other industries might not follow that. So mining, for example, wouldn't be the same necessarily. Agriculture would certainly have a different one because it would be policy dependent. And you've then got construction, which I think is an absolute classic. Heavy trucks would also really follow the business cycle. So the business cycle is a concept that's been around for a while. It's pretty proven. And really what it means is that management need to be able to know where they are in the business cycle and be ready for the next stage.
Okay, so when we talk about the business cycle, to my mind, there's two things. It's like the overall economic cycle, and then within individual industries, there's also these peaks and troughs as well.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And those individual industries are often driven by other things. So, it could be technology, for example, that could make a huge difference. Policy, particularly, when it comes to maybe say house building or agricultural policy, those things will have a big influence. Environmental policies, they make a big difference. And then of course you've got the whole thing about sentiment, because sentiment has such a big part to play. So if sentiment's negative, then that will actually maybe induce a downturn. Whereas if they're scared of missing out, like Bitcoin or AI, then it will actually have the opposite effect.
So sentiment's like the feeling, I suppose, of how people feel things are going.
That's exactly right. And you can't ignore that. Markets are very, very open to sentiment. And if it's up, then everything's great. But it doesn't take much to get it to go down. So, you can see how that changes with things like the oil price, political intrigue, particularly I'd say if there's a threat of war, that has a big impact. And here as we sit at the beginning of, February 2025, there's a lot of things that are impacting, the threat of tariffs, for example, is a huge issue. People don't know what to do about that. There's war in Ukraine, there's war in the Middle East, there's threats from China. So, that they all impact upon sentiment.
Now, are you seeing a lot of questions from clients or people know about the business cycle? Is that becoming a bit of a topic at the minute, or is it something that people don't want to talk about, but they should know about?
Right. So the good ones, the ones who are ahead of the curve, have been ready for the business cycle and have taken the necessary steps, I would say, already. And they understand how to make the most out of the opportunities in a business cycle. So just because, business is in the downturn doesn't mean to say other activities should be in a downturn. The obvious thing is to take the accountant-led approach and switch off the money to discretionary spending, like for example marketing or training, public relations. But the smart ones are already ahead of that because they know, in fact, that technically, for example, we have seen the Eurozone in recession now for nearly a year, maybe a bit more. The UK very flat, for example. Canada quite flat. So what you're seeing is that those people understand that we're about to get out, and they're actually spending money. And then you've got the others who are well behind it, don't comprehend, don't know what to do, sit there wondering what to do rather than sort of managing their way out of it. And they don't, all they see is, if you like, as a lag indicator, their sales down, their profit down, and then they think, right, well, what do we do? You know, and you tend then to get the knee-jerk reaction, which is, you know, slash costs, and really forget that they're there to sell things.
Yeah. Okay. So you would put us sort of in the recession, sort of the trough part of it now, but possibly looking to get out of there. And I won't ask you to sort of give a time scale on that, because I think that becomes quite tricky.
Yeah, that would be very clever.
Yeah. So I think probably the main question people would be, if we feel we're in this recessionary stage, this sort of downturn stage, we're starting to feel the pinch a bit. What can businesses do, and so what can we do as individuals? What precautions do we need to take? You could have touched on that. Maybe if we prepared for it, we'd be ready to spend some money on other things. But so, what's the what advice would you give?
Well, the first thing is don't wait.
Okay.
Don't sit on your hands, because that's really that's never going to get you anywhere. So you need to be quite passionate in terms of taking action, and I think there's always the two sides to it. And the first thing is to think about how you can generate more income, go for your low-hanging fruit, go for ideas that you know do work. I think get your team motivated to believe they can do that, and you know, really get everybody on that sort of, you know, that war footing, you know.
Right,
I mean, I know one managing director who very famously went into a meeting wearing a tin helmet, a World War II tin helmet. And he said, it's a war out there and we're going to win it. And that type of behaviour, I think, is the first thing. The second thing is, when it comes to efficiencies and effectiveness, you've got to question everything in a positive way, not necessarily in a negative way. It's not about slash. It is, though, about saying, right, how do we become more effective here? So, for example, I would be looking at things like utilisation of resource, making sure you're squeezing the pips, I guess is the thing. But you know, I suppose then you've also got to say, you know, what sort of industry are you in?
Yeah.
The more traditional ones will respond more to the traditional, you know, cures and remedies which are well known. If you're in, you know, a new industry or a disruptive industry, then quite clearly, you know, you're going to be looking for those type of tactics to see you through.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think your bit about motivating people is quite powerful, because, as you mentioned before, sort of the sentiment. I think it does become quite a feeling that everything's on the downturn and we're not happy with it, and it can become quite sort of depressive. And just say, oh, we're expecting layoffs, we're expecting lower sales. And I think if you do go in with that kind of idea, no, we're in here to fight, and you can motivate people, then suddenly it becomes it can actually become quite interesting. Let's try and innovate our way out of this, rather than sort of running scared, hide in the trenches. How are we going to do that? So I like that. Like that idea. Is there any? You said the tin hat thing. Is there any other thing that you'd sort of any anecdotes, I suppose, or ways that you've heard people who kind of change the perspective of employees and businesses, and move from kind of looking down and everything's glum to positivity? What can we do? Right.
So I think we're back to Roosevelt. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. You remember that famous quote, his fireside chat? And I think that's the first thing. You know, you get to my age and have been through so many of these that you realise it is not the end of the world. You know, so starting work when I did in the early 80s was a massive recession and stagflation. I'm still here, you know, in the 80s. The 90s, We saw, particularly in Europe, we saw the idea of currency union and the problems that caused, how that can really constricted. We had the financial crisis, of course, of 2007, 2008. We had COVID. So my point would be, first of all, that it isn't going to be the end of the world, right? And don't think it is. So once you've been there and done it, you do have the confidence, all right, they're all different, but you can do something about it. And then really it's about saying to people, follow me. But if you're a leader, it does sort of imply that you know where you're going.
Yes.
So I think that's the point. Do you know where you're going? Have you got yourself a plan? If you've got that plan, then you want to communicate it well, and you want to bring people with you, and you can do that in many different ways. But I think people believe what they see, not what they hear.
Yeah.
So, follow me is a very strong thing. Not go and do this, which is not so strong, really, Okay. So, motivating the team, I think, is really about sharing that vision. This is what we're going to do. Explaining the context, give people the why, give them the why, and then the what and whatever else follows. And if people are told, this is the situation we're in, they're bright enough to understand what needs to happen, Yeah,
okay. Ian, thank you very much for that.
It's a pleasure, Adam.